My son left me hungry, and the $780 check proved it. The itemized bill literally counted me as 5 people. I sat there with nothing but water while Lobster hit the table. The waiter kept glancing at me like, is this for real? My stomach was in knots, and I didn't let a tear fall. They thought I'd swallow it like I always did. They didn't know I owned the whole damn place. Wrong move. I keep receipts. 1 week earlier, look, I need you to understand something about me before I drop you into that dining room. I'm not some fragile little old lady who cries at the first mean comment. I'm a mom. I raised a kid. I paid bills I didn't have the money for. I worked my fingers raw and still showed up with cupcakes to school events like everything was fine. So when I tell you I sat at a white tablecloth table and got just water like I was a stray dog, I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you exactly how it went down. And yeah, if you're already thinking I would have flipped the table, trust me, I thought about it. It started the week before, on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at that Starbucks off Central Expressway in Dallas, the one that's always packed, trying to pretend I wasn't watching my bank app like a hawk. My phone buzzed and I saw my son's name, Jason Walker. We hadn't been close for a while. Busy is what he always called it. Work, marriage, the baby, life. You know how people say that when what they mean is, you've slipped down my priority list? I answered anyway, because that's what moms do. Jason's voice came out soft, too soft. The kind of soft that makes your shoulders tighten because you know there's a catch. He said, Mom, can we grab dinner this week? Just us. I want to reconnect. Reconnect. That word landed weird, like he'd been practicing it in front of a mirror. I said, well, okay. Where? He didn't even hesitate. This place Brittany's been wanting to try. It's really nice. Right there, I should have heard the warning bell. Because nothing Brittany wants is simple. Brittany Collins, my daughter-in-law, doesn't do simple. She does optics. She does status. She does the little smile that says, you're beneath her, even while she's calling you, sweetie. I asked, is Brittany coming? A pause. Then he goes, yeah. And her parents are in town, so it'll be good. Everyone together, so no, not just us. And I swear, my first thought was, why do I feel like I'm walking into an ambush? Still, he said, reconnect, and my heart did that stupid hopeful thing. Because no matter how old your kid gets, there's always a part of you that thinks, maybe this time he'll see me again. Maybe this time he'll act like my son. Big mistake. That night at home, I treated it like a job interview. That's embarrassing to admit, but it's the truth. I pulled out my nicest dress, pearl gray, simple, classy. I did my hair the way I used to when I wanted to feel like I had my life together. I stood in my bathroom and dabbed on lipstick like it was armor. And before you judge me, tell me you've never gotten ready to be respected. I even texted Jason, what time? And he replied, 7:30, valet. Don't worry about paying. Don't worry about paying. Like I'd asked. Like he already had a story in his head about me counting pennies. Noted. Friday came fast. Dallas was doing that thing it does where the air feels warm even after sunset. The kind of night where people are out showing off. I drove my modest little sedan into the valet circle and handed my keys to a kid who looked like he still had homework. The restaurant was tucked into one of those glossy upscale pockets, brick outside, soft lighting inside, the kind of place where nobody's chewing gum and everybody smells expensive. The sign out front was all understated metal letters, Harbor and Vine. I walked in and immediately saw the setup. Literally, I saw the table. They were already seated. Jason, Brittany, Brittany's parents, Richard and Linda Collins, sitting like they owned the room. Crystal chandeliers above them, white tablecloth, black leather menus, the whole show. And there was a fifth place setting at the end, pushed tight into a corner. For me, Brittany stood up halfway. Not all the way, like her knees couldn't commit to it. She leaned in and did this air kiss thing next to my cheek, and her perfume hit me like a wall. She said, "You're late, Patricia. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Walker. Not even Pat. Just Patricia." Like we were coworkers, and she was annoyed I missed a meeting. Jason looked up and smiled, small, cautious. "Hey, Mom." That was it. No hug, no "I'm glad you came," just, "Hey." I slid into that corner seat and smoothed my dress like I hadn't noticed the placement. Like I wasn't being tucked away. Like I couldn't feel Linda's eyes scanning me, head to toe, the way people do when they're deciding what box to put you in. The menus had no prices. No prices means one thing. Somebody wants you nervous. Richard ordered immediately, loud and comfortable, like he belonged there. He asked for their best bourbon. Linda wanted a glass of wine, not too sweet. Brittany snapped. Her fingers actually snapped, and the waiter, Ethan Brooks, stepped closer like he'd been summoned. Brittany said, "We'll start with lobster thermidor, and bring your best white wine." Ethan nodded, pen poised. "How many orders of the thermidor?" Brittany didn't even look at me. She said, 5. Jason's hand moved, quick, like a correction. He said, 4. And Ethan paused. Just a beat. That tiny beat where a stranger realizes something in your family isn't right. Brittany tilted her head at Jason like he'd said something clever. "Yes, 4. Then she finally looked at me. And the smile she gave me was all teeth, no warmth. I waited. I thought, maybe they're ordering appetizers first. Maybe I'll order after. Ethan glanced at me politely. "And for you, ma'am?" I opened my mouth, and Brittany cut right over me like I wasn't even there. She said, "We don't provide extra food, just water for her." Silence hit the table. You know that moment where your whole body goes hot, but your face stays frozen? That was me. My fingers went stiff around my napkin. I looked at Ethan, and he blinked like he wasn't sure he heard right. Jason didn't correct her. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't say, "Brittany, stop." He nodded, barely, like this was normal. I turned my head to him. Slow. I gave him one chance with my eyes. He looked away. Then he said, calm as a man reading a grocery list, "Mom already ate. She's fine." Is said. A lie. Not even a good one. Just a lie meant to pin me down in public. My chest got tight. Not from sadness, more like pressure. Like something inside me finally hit the wall. If your own kid can do that to your face, in front of strangers, what do you even call that? Right here is the moment I need you with me, okay? Because this is where a lot of people would have exploded, and I get it. But I've learned something the hard way. If you blow up too early, people stop hearing your words and start judging your behavior. They'll call you unstable, dramatic, emotional, especially a woman my age. So I didn't give them that. I looked at Ethan and I said, very calmly, "Water is fine." And then I looked back at Brittany and gave her a little nod like I was filing paperwork. Game on. That's my controversial moment, and I want your honest take. Would you have gotten up and walked out right then, or would you have stayed and watched them bury themselves? Comment below. Ethan brought the water like he was carrying a bomb. Cold glass, condensation, already sliding down the side. He set it in front of me with this careful gentleness, like he wanted to apologize without getting fired. The room smelled like butter and garlic and money. Brittany started talking immediately, acting like nothing happened. She asked her dad about his golf trip. She laughed too loud at something Linda said. Jason sat there smiling like a hostage who'd decided to cooperate. I kept my hands in my lap so nobody could see them shake. And I watched. Because once you see your kid choose someone else's cruelty over your dignity, you can't unsee it. Ethan came back with bread for the table, a basket of warm rolls that looked like a magazine photo. He set it in the center. Brittany slid it toward Richard and Linda, not toward me. And then she said, almost cheerful, "So," Jason told us, "you've been keeping things simple." Jason jumped in like he was delivering a report. "Yeah, Mom's humble, always has been." Humble. He said it like it was a personality trait, not a lifetime of grinding. Linda smiled with that tight, polite face. It must be difficult right now for people your age. Retirement, savings, all of that. It's now. Richard nodded like I was a charity case. You did the best you could, I'm sure. I took a sip of water and felt the cold hit my teeth. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Mostly, I wanted to rewind the last 32 years and teach my son what loyalty looks like. Instead, I asked Jason, quietly, so this is what you wanted? A reconnect? His eyes flicked to Brittany, then back to his plate, like it had answers. Mom, don't start. Oh, I wasn't starting. I was documenting. The first lobster plate hit the table a few minutes later, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, all set down with this fancy little flourish. Ethan explained the dish like we were on a cooking show, but I couldn't hear the words over the sound of shells cracking and forks scraping and Brittany saying, like she was performing for an audience. There was a fifth empty setting in front of me. A clean plate, unused silverware, a glass of water, sweating like it was nervous. And I sat there with my hands folded like I was at a funeral. I caught Ethan's eyes once. He looked away fast, but I saw it in his face. He was embarrassed for them. Richard started in with that rich person talk, property, connections, people they knew. Jason nodded along, eager, trying to match the rhythm. Then Brittany dropped the first real knife. She said, casual as anything, we've been making some changes for Emma. Emma is my granddaughter, 4 years old, big brown eyes. The kind of kid who runs into you like you're her favorite thing in the world. My throat went tight, and that scared me more than the humiliation. Linda leaned in. It's important children are surrounded by the right influences. Richard added, people who add value. Brittany dabbed her lips with her napkin and looked right at me. And no interruptions. No unexpected visits. That word interruptions, like I was a door-to-door salesman. Jason tried, weakly. Brittany, that's not necessary. End quote. And Brittany shut him down with a look. Not even words, just a look. And he folded. Instantly, I stared at him, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized. This dinner wasn't a reconnect. It was a lesson. They wanted to teach me my place. They picked the wrong woman. Ethan came back and asked if anyone wanted another round. Richard ordered cognac like it was water. Brittany asked about a different wine, something that sounded like it came with its own trust fund. Linda laughed and said, it's a celebration. I said nothing. I drank water. Brittany's jewelry caught the light every time she moved her hand. Her beige dress was perfectly pressed. Her watch probably cost more than my car. She wore all of it like a warning. Then she asked me, sweet as syrup, so Patricia, are you working or are you retired? Before I could answer, she answered for me. She said, she's always been good at, cleaning, cooking, honest work. As the way she said honest made it sound dirty. Richard nodded, satisfied. We worked hard to give Brittany opportunities so she wouldn't have to do that. Jason laughed a little, like a man trying to blend in. And I swear to you, I could feel something in me separate, like a cord snapping clean. Because I remembered Jason at 17, sitting at my kitchen table, eating ramen because it was cheap, telling me he wanted to go to college. I remembered working late shifts, coming home, smelling like fryer oil, still packing his lunch. I remembered skipping my own doctor appointments so he could have a car. And now he was laughing with people who treated me like an embarrassing hobby. I leaned back slightly and said, very softly, I'm observing. Brittany blinked. Excuse me? I smiled, like I didn't care, like I wasn't bleeding inside. Nothing. Keep going. She rolled her eyes. Linda smirked. Richard went back to his drink. And the lobsters kept coming like a parade I wasn't allowed to join. The funniest part, if you can call it funny, was how Brittany kept making sure the number stayed 4. 4 entree. 4 plates. 4 dessert later. Like if she said it enough times, she could erase my existence. At one point, Ethan came to clear plates, and he hesitated near me because my plate was untouched. He looked like he wanted to ask if I was okay, but he didn't. He just picked up a napkin that hadn't been used and moved on. Brittany leaned toward Jason and said something under her breath. I caught the last part. It's awkward. I said, What's awkward? Jason flinched. Nothing. Brittany smiled wider. Some guests earlier thought you were the help. I felt the heat rise up my neck so fast it surprised me, Linda added, like she was offering helpful feedback. You know how people are. First impressions matter. I set my glass down carefully, because if I slammed it, I was going to do more than slam a glass. I said, So let me get this straight. You invited me here to reconnect, and your plan was to sit me in the corner, feed me water, and talk about me like I'm not a person. Jason hissed. Mom, please. Brittany tilted her head again. You're making it sound ugly. It is ugly, I said. Richard frowned like I'd broken a rule. Respectfully, Patricia, you should understand your position here. My position? I looked at Jason. Is that how you see me? A position? He stared at the tablecloth like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Brittany jumped in, sharp now. What can you really offer this family? I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because the nerve, I said, love. Brittany didn't miss a beat. Love doesn't pay for private universities. Jason's face twitched like he wanted to disagree. He didn't. I want you to picture this part, because it's burned into me. A table full of cracked lobster shells, wine glasses half empty, Brittany's lipstick still perfect, and me sitting there with a glass of water and a plate that never got used. And nobody at that table thought they were the bad guy. That's what freaked me out the most. How normal they acted while doing something so cruel. Ethan came over with the check folder and set it right by Jason's elbow. Leather folder. Heavy little thud, like punctuation. Jason opened it and his eyebrows lifted. Richard chuckled. Worth it. Brittany said, obviously. Jason glanced at the total and muttered, $7.80. Reasonable for 5 people. 5. He said it out loud, like it was nothing. But that word hit me like a slap. Because even though they'd been saying 4 all night, that check counted me. They just didn't feed me. I leaned forward. What did you just say? Jason looked up, nervous. Nothing. I mean, say it again? He swallowed. It says, 5 people. I nodded once, slow. Like I was locking something into place. Done. They all stood up like the night had ended on their terms. Brittany fixed her lipstick using her phone camera. Linda adjusted her necklace. Richard talked about their next trip like we were at a country club. Jason tossed a couple bills onto the table for a tip, $40 cash, and said, Okay, Mom, we'll drop you at your car. Drop me at my car. Like I was a burden they were escorting out of their life. I didn't stand. They paused, confused. Brittany's smile slipped for the first time all night. Jason said, Mom? I said, I need the restroom. Brittany exhaled like I was inconveniencing her schedule. Fine. Hurry. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress again, and I picked up my purse. My heart was thumping, but my hands were steady now. That was the strange part. My body had stopped begging for approval. I walked away from that table with my head high, and I didn't turn toward the restroom. I turned toward the service hallway, because that hallway wasn't unfamiliar to me. It was mine. I could feel the heat from the kitchen before I even pushed the door open. The sound hit next pans sizzling, voices calling orders, the sharp rhythm of a place that runs on precision. A line cook looked up like he was about to tell me I couldn't be there, then stopped when he recognized me. And that's when Mark Rivera, my GM, stepped into view in his white apron, eyes widening like he'd just seen a ghost. He said, loud enough for the kitchen to hear, Mrs. Walker, why aren't you eating? The air went still for half a second, and out in the dining room, I could already feel them getting ready to leave without me. Not today. Would you have let them walk out clean after that? I didn't answer Mark right away. I just looked him dead in the face and said, I need you in the dining room. Now. Cut to black. You're going to want to hear what I told him next. Mark Rivera wasn't asking a question anymore. He was calling a code. And you and I both know what that means when a grown man looks that angry in a kitchen. She picked the wrong one. He stood there in his apron like he was holding himself back from marching straight into the dining room and detonating my whole family in front of God and everybody. The line cooks had gone quiet, pans still sizzling, but every head turned my way. Mark said it again, lower this time. Miss Walker, why aren't you eating? And look, I'm not proud of it, but I lied on instinct. Not a big lie, a protective lie. The kind you tell when you're still deciding how hard you want to swing. I said, it's fine, I'm just not hungry. Mark's eyes narrowed, like he could smell the nonsense. He leaned closer, voice tight. I watched your table for 20 minutes. They didn't bring you a thing. The way he said, your table, almost made me laugh. Because technically, yeah, it was my table. Every table in that dining room was mine. But I wasn't ready to use that card yet. Not until I had more than rage. I took a breath and said, Mark, I need you to do me a favor. Don't go out there. Not yet. His jaw clenched. You want me to just let them treat you like that? I looked him dead in the face. I want receipts. I want it clean. And I want it undeniable. He stared at me for a beat, then gave one sharp nod like he understood exactly what kind of woman I was. Okay, office. Now. He moved first, and I followed him through the service hallway like I belonged there, which I did. The smell back there was heat and citrus cleaner and garlic. The floor was a little slick. The staff stepped aside without being told. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and people straighten up because they respect you? That hit me right in the spine. And I hadn't felt respected in a while. Mark pushed open the office door and shut it behind us. Small room, security monitors on one wall, clipboards and invoices stacked like a paper skyline, a little mini fridge humming under the counter. Normal restaurant stuff. Except the screens. 14 camera feeds. Dining room angles. Hallway. Bar. Front host stand. Valet loop. And on one of the screens, clear as day, was my table, Jason's profile, Brittany's blonde hair, Richard waving his glass like he was giving a speech, Linda leaning in to laugh, and me, in the corner, holding my water like a prop. Mark clicked a mouse, rewound the feed. Show me the moment, he said, like he was talking to himself as much as me. I held up a hand. Wait. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Mark stopped. He turned toward a filing tray and pulled out a reservation packet. He flipped to a printed sheet and slid it across the desk to me. At the top, it had the reservation name, Jason Walker. Party size, 5. 5. Then, below that, in the special notes section, there were typed lines, clean little bullet points, like someone had planned a birthday surprise. Only it wasn't a surprise. It was a setup. Seat family at center table. Good lighting. Guest arriving separately. Older woman. End quote. Do not allow guests to order. Water only. Dessert for 4. My fingers went cold around the edge of that paper. That's when my lie about not hungry died right there on the desk. Mark watched my face, and his eyes filled in the blanks. She wrote this, he said, voice rough. Your daughter-in-law? I didn't answer right away, because I needed to breathe through the first wave of pure disgust. Then I said, yes. Mark swore under his breath. That's sick. He even nosed, and you know what? It wasn't just sick. It was organized. It was intentional. It was somebody sitting at home days earlier, typing out water only, like they were ordering a side of fries. If you've ever been treated like you're less than, you already know what hit me next. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. Wrong move. Mark said, tell me what you want me to do. I looked up at the security screens, watched Brittany gesture at the breadbasket while she ignored me like I was furniture. And I told Mark the truth. Simple and sharp. I want to hear them say it. I want to hear the way they justify it. Mark hesitated. There's no audio at the tables. I pointed at the little microphone icon on the screen in the corner of the dining room view. Then what's that? His face shifted. That's for the bar area and the host stand. We upgraded after, safety. I nodded. Close enough. He clicked and dragged the timeline. The feed jumped back a few minutes. He leaned in, listening through the computer speakers. There was restaurant noise, silverware clinking, distant laughter, a waiter calling out something in the background. Then Brittany's voice cut through, crisp and confident, close enough to pick up. She said, "No, just water for her." My stomach flipped like I'd just watched myself get hit. A second later, Jason's voice came through quieter, almost nervous. He said, "She already ate. She's fine." One dime, and right behind that, Brittany again, like she was sealing a deal. It's better this way. Better this way. That little phrase did something to me. Because better this way is what people say when they know they're wrong and they don't care. Mark's hand tightened on the mouse. I can go out there right now. I held up my palm again. Not yet. He stared at me like I was crazy. And maybe I was. But here's the thing. You don't get to pull off a move like this unless you're confident nobody can stop you. Brittany didn't just want to humiliate me. She wanted to teach me I had no power. So I was going to let her talk. Let her hang herself in her own words. Let Jason sit in it, too. Mark said, "At least let me bring you food. In the back. Anything." I shook my head. No. If I eat now, they'll say I'm lying. His eyes flashed. They already lied. I know, I said. That's why I'm doing this clean. I pulled out my phone and took a quick photo of the reservation notes. Not the screens, not the audio. Just that paper with water only and dessert for 4. If anybody ever tried to spin this later, I wanted the simplest proof in the world. Their plan printed out like an instruction manual. Mark watched me do it and gave a tight nod. You want me nearby? I said, close, but not visible. He exhaled through his nose. Okay, I'll post up at the host stand. If you give me a look, I'm in. I opened the office door and stepped back into the hallway. And you know what hit me as soon as I walked out? The noise. The restaurant was still running. Couples laughing, glasses clinking, people eating like the world wasn't ending for one woman in a corner. It was such a weird contrast it almost made me dizzy. But it also gave me something. Cover. I walked back toward the dining room like I was just heading to the restroom. Like nothing was wrong. And the whole time, I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Back at the table, Brittany was mid-sentence, and she didn't even pause when I sat back down. She said, and it's just common sense. Image matters. Linda nodded like she was listening to a sermon. Richard smiled like he'd already won. Jason looked relieved that I hadn't made a scene. That relief made me want to slap him. Brittany glanced at my water glass and asked Ethan, loud enough for the whole table, "Can we get her a refill? She drinks fast." Ethan's mouth tightened for half a second. "Yes, ma'am." He looked at me when he picked up the glass. His eyes said, "I'm sorry." His hands said, "I can't fix this." And I let him take it, because I needed him to hear everything that happened next. Brittany turned right back to me and smiled. "So, Patricia, we were talking about boundaries." There it was again. That fake, gentle word people use to dress up cruelty. I said, "I heard." She tilted her head. "Good, because I don't want confusion later." Richard leaned back, crossing his arms. "You've had your time with Emma. Now it's time for structure." I kept my face calm. "Structure like what?" Linda leaned in, voice soft but sharp. "Like not popping by. Like not inserting yourself at events." "Inserting myself," I repeated, "at my granddaughter's events." Brittany's eyes narrowed. "You make things awkward." I almost laughed. "Me, I make things awkward." Jason's cheeks flushed. But he still wouldn't look at me. He kept staring at the table like it was safer than my face. Brittany tapped her nail on her wine glass. Click, 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 like she was calling order in court. She said, Emma is learning social cues, and I don't want her confused. I stared at her. Confused about what? Brittany smiled, like she was explaining something to a child. About what success looks like. There it was. Not even subtle. Richard added, kids need role models who add value. Add value. Like a kid is a stock portfolio. My mouth tasted like metal. And if you're sitting there thinking, how do people say this stuff out loud? Trust me, I was right there with you. I set my hands flat on my lap and said, Emma's 4. Linda shrugged. And she's absorbing everything. Brittany leaned forward, voice dropping into that sweet threat tone. We're protecting her. Protecting her from what? A grandma who loves her? Would you have let that slide? Because I wanted to explode. I wanted to stand up and say, you don't get to speak about love when you treat people like trash. But I didn't. I watched Jason. I watched his throat move when he swallowed. I watched him stay silent, and I filed it away. He chose this. Brittany waved Ethan back over, like she was summoning a servant. Dessert menu. I motioned. Ethan nodded and handed menus around. He handed one to Richard, one to Linda, one to Brittany, one to Jason. He didn't hand one to me. He paused, just a second, then looked at Brittany like he was waiting for permission to treat me like a human. Brittany didn't even glance up from the menu. She said, dessert for 4. 4. Again, I stared at the empty space in front of me, the place where a dessert menu should have landed, and I felt something shift, deep and final. Know your position. That's what they wanted. That's what the whole night was built around. Richard chuckled. You're quiet, Patricia. I looked at him. I'm listening. He raised his eyebrows. To what? To how comfortable you are being cruel, I said, calm as a thermostat. Brittany laughed, one sharp bark of a laugh. Oh my God, you're dramatic. Jason finally looked at me, and his eyes begged me to stop. Stop what? Existing? Brittany leaned back, satisfied. This is exactly what I mean. You make everything heavy. Linda nodded. And honestly, it reflects on us. Reflects on us. There it is. The real disease. I said, so you're worried about what people think. Brittany's lips curled. I'm worried about the kind of scenes you cause. You caused this, I said, voice still quiet. Not me. Jason cut in quick, like he was trying to put a lid on boiling water. Mom, please, just let it go. I turned to him. Let what go? He looked away again. All of it. And that's when it hit me in the most disgusting way. Jason didn't want peace. He wanted silence. Brittany rested her hand on his arm like she was rewarding a trained dog. Thank you. That little touch made my stomach turn. Ethan returned with 4 dessert plates, arranged like tiny pieces of art. Chocolate, something with gold flakes, a scoop of vanilla that probably cost $10 by itself. He set them down carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he stepped back, eyes flicking to me like he wished a 5th plate would appear by magic. It didn't. Brittany took her fork and said, like she was filming a commercial. Linda cut into hers and said, this is divine. Richard laughed. Now this is living. Jason lifted his fork, then paused, like guilt was finally catching up to him. Brittany nudged him with her elbow. Eat. He did. I sat there with nothing and watched my son eat dessert while his wife treated me like I wasn't worth a menu. And here's what I need you to hear. That moment wasn't about food. It was about permission. They were testing whether they could do it and get away with it. And the scariest part? Jason was helping them. Brittany dabbed her lips and said, so we're clear, right? No unexpected appearances, no stopping by, no popping up at school, no showing up at parties unless you're invited. End quote. I leaned forward slightly. You think you can tell me not to show up at my granddaughter's birthday? Brittany shrugged. If it's what's best, Richard added. Don't make it ugly. Oh, that was rich. Linda looked at me with that fake sympathy face. We know it's hard, but you'll adjust. Adjust. Like I was being relocated. My fingers curled around the edge of my napkin. I could have torn it in half. Instead, I took my phone out and flipped it over on my lap, screen down, and hit record on a voice memo by feel. Not because I planned to play it in court or anything, because sometimes you need your own proof just to keep yourself sane. Because people like this will look you straight in the face later and say, "That's not what happened." Brittany kept going, and she got bolder as she talked, like the power was making her high. She said, "Honestly, Patricia, you should be grateful. Most people your age don't get included at all." My jaw tightened. Included in what? Being insulted? She smiled. Included in our life. Our circle, Linda said. And it's not personal. It's just standards. Standards. Richard raised his glass. Here's to standards. Jason lifted his glass too. He actually lifted his glass. And I swear, my body went so still, it felt like ice. Some people say family is family no matter what. I say if your family humiliates you for sport, they're not family. They're enemies with your last name. Brittany set her fork down and looked right at me. So, can you do it? I said, do what? She spoke slowly, like she was laying down final terms. Can you stay in your lane? There it was. The whole night in one sentence. I held her gaze, and I felt my voice go flat. You don't get to assign me a lane. Brittany's smile dropped. Watch me. In it, Mara, Jason hissed. Mom, I cut him off with one hand, still calm. Jason, you called me. You asked me to reconnect. Was this your idea too? His face went red, then pale. He looked at Brittany, then at me, then back down. He said, I just wanted everyone to get along. That's the lie cowards love. Get along means let the loudest person win. Brittany leaned in, eyes bright. Don't put this on him. I stared at her. I'm putting it on whoever planned water only. That did it. Linda's face tightened. Richard's smile vanished. Brittany's eyes flashed like I'd slapped her. She said, Excuse me? I kept my voice steady. You heard me. Brittany laughed again, but this time it sounded thin. That's insane. Nobody said that. And there it was. Denial. Right on schedule. Jason stared at his plate. Frozen. Richard leaned forward, voice low and threatening. Careful. Careful. Like I was the one causing harm? I nodded once. Oh, I'm being very careful. End quote. I pushed my chair back slightly, like I might stand. And Brittany's eyes tracked me fast. You could see it, she thought I was about to make a scene. She thought she'd won because she'd pushed me to the edge. Instead, I leaned in close enough that only Jason could hear me. I said, You should have told me the truth. His eyes snapped up to mine. For the first time all night, he looked scared. He whispered, Mom, please. And that please was for him, not me. He wanted me to protect him from the consequences of his choices. Not today. I stood up slowly, smooth and controlled, and I picked up my purse. Brittany's voice went sharp. Where are you going? I smiled slightly. To wash my hands, because that's what I needed to wash my hands of the whole table. I walked away without rushing. I didn't look back. And behind me, I heard Brittany mutter, God, she's such a burden. A burden. Right into my phone recording. Mark was at the host stand like he promised, eyes locked on me. I didn't even have to speak. I just gave him a small look. He moved. He met me at the hallway entrance and said, Lo, you okay? I leaned in and whispered, Show me the feed again. I want the part where she planned it. Mark's face went hard. Come on. Back in the office? He shut the door and clicked the timeline again, rewinding further, closer to when they first sat down. The camera showed Brittany leaning toward Ethan. The angle didn't catch her mouth fully, but the audio picked her up clearer. This time she was closer to the host stand side of the dining room. Brittany said, cheerful as anything, just water for her. She'll survive. Richard chuckled. Linda said something I couldn't fully make out, like a little laugh comment. Then Jason, my son, spoke. He said, "Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine." 2 seconds of audio. That's all it took to change everything in my head. Because before that, there was still a part of me, stupid, soft, hopeful, that thought Jason was trapped. That he was weak, not cruel. That Brittany was the engine and he was just in the passenger seat. No, he was holding the map. Mark paused the feed and looked at me like he was waiting for me to fall apart. I didn't cry. My body went quiet, like something shut off. And then I said, "Play it again." Mark did. "Yeah, that's fine." Again. I stared at the screen, at the outline of my son's face, at the way he nodded like he was approving a dinner order. And in my chest, something hardened. Love without respect isn't love. Mark said, "Miss Walker, do you want me to call security? Do you want me to kick them out?" I swallowed once. "Not yet." Mark blinked, stunned. After hearing that, I nodded. After hearing that, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. He leaned forward. Then, what's the move? I looked down at my phone, at the photo of the reservation notes, at the voice memo recording, at the ugly truth sitting there in neat little files, and I said, "Now I get smarter." Mark's eyes sharpened. "Okay." I stood there for a beat, listening to the muffled dining room noise through the wall. Laughter. A server calling out, "Corner." Somebody's birthday at another table, probably. Life going on. And my own kid sitting out there thinking he'd get away with it. Mark tapped the desk lightly. "There's something else." I looked at him. "What?" He hesitated, then clicked to another screen front host stand camera. It caught the moment Brittany walked in earlier and spoke to the hostess. Mark turned up the audio. Brittany's voice came through, clear as day, and it made my stomach drop. She said, "If she makes a scene, record everything." Mark glanced at me. That's why the hostess logged the notes. Brittany told her to. Brittany came prepared. Not just to humiliate me, to frame me, to make me look like the problem if I reacted. And that's when I finally felt it, not the old hurt, something colder. Because if she was planning to capture my reaction, what else had she been planning? Mark slid the reservation sheet back toward me. His finger tapped the last line, "Dessert for 4. Then he looked up and said, "They've done this before, haven't they?" My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. He just clicked through another file on the computer past reservation history tied to the phone number. My stomach tightened as I watched the screen. There were other bookings under Jason's name. Same phone number, same email, and in the notes field on 2 of them, the same little pattern showed up. Older woman, arriving separately. Seat at end. Keep minimal service. Minimal service. I stared at those words until they blurred. Because this wasn't one dinner. This was a habit. This was practice. And it was worse than I thought. Mark's voice was low. "You want me to pull every record?" I looked up at him, and my voice came out quiet but firm. "Yes." Then I grabbed my purse, squared my shoulders, and headed back toward that dining room. Because now I wasn't just angry. Now I had proof that this wasn't a one-time cruelty. It was a pattern. Lights out. You're going to want to know what I did with those records. That printed reservation history wasn't the end of it. And if you've ever felt your own kid pick someone else over you, you already know how my next move felt. Not today. Mark Rivera had the records pulled up on his screen like a crime scene timeline. Same phone number, same email, same little older woman arriving separately, note popping up like a bad habit that finally got caught on camera. He said, "These go back months." Thanks for watching. And that's when my brain stopped treating this like a rude dinner and started treating it like a pattern of behavior. Because one ugly night is cruelty, multiple nights is strategy. Mark clicked print, and the office printer started spitting out pages, reservation notes, timestamps, server assignments, table numbers, paper stacking up like a case file. He slid the first page to me. This is the one from tonight. This is the hostess note log. And this, he tapped the second sheet, is the old reservation from September. Same exact language. Minimal service. My fingers held the page so tight I could feel the edge dig into my skin. And here's the thing, Brittany didn't just want to shame me. She wanted to normalize it, get everyone used to seeing me treated like less, so nobody would question it anymore. That's what people like her do. They don't just cross lines. They move the line. Mark watched my face and said, "Tell me what you want, Miss Walker." A simple question, but it landed heavy. Because in the dining room, I didn't get choices. I got assigned water only. Back here, I had choices. I had leverage. So I said, "I want the bill. Itemized. Printed. With the party size." Mark nodded once. Easy. He logged into the POS system with his manager code and started pulling the check. Table 12. Under Walker. He turned the monitor slightly so I could see it. The total popped up $780 in change. Then the line items. Lobster, thermidor, wine, cognac, dessert. A whole parade of expensive food. Then, right there on the ticket header, it said, "Guests 5. My stomach tightened. But it wasn't confusion anymore. It was confirmation. "Print 2 copies," I said. Mark hit the print button. Done. Done. The printer whirred again. He grabbed both receipts, held them like they were fragile, and handed one to me. That little strip of paper felt heavier than my purse. Mark said, "Want Ethan's statement too?" I blinked. He'd do that? Mark didn't hesitate. Ethan's a good kid. He's been looking sick all night. He'll tell the truth. So Mark stepped out of the office, and I stayed put, staring at the security screens while my family kept eating and laughing like nothing was happening. And what got me wasn't the food. It wasn't even Brittany's smug face. It was Jason's hands, calm, comfortable, cutting into dessert like he hadn't just approved water only for his own mother. That's the part that sticks. Mark came back with Ethan a minute later. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His cheeks were flushed, and he kept wiping his palms on his apron. Mark said, "Ethan, just tell her what you heard. That's it." And Ethan looked at me, and I could see he was scared of getting involved, scared of losing his job, scared of the kind of rich customers who like to punish service workers for having morals. He swallowed and said, "Ma'am, when they sat down, she told me, just water for her." She said it like it was normal. "And Jason?" I asked. Ethan's eyes flicked down. He didn't argue. He nodded. A nod. That's all it takes to break a relationship, right? Mark handed Ethan a blank incident form. "Write it down. Date and time. What you remember. Sign it." Ethan's hand trembled as he wrote, but he wrote it. And while he did, Mark pulled up one more screen. "There's something else," he said. He clicked into the reservation notes again and highlighted the line Brittany had added. "If she makes a scene, record everything." I stared at that. Because if she was planning to record me, she wasn't just cruel, she was setting me up to look like the villain. Mark said, "That's why I upgraded the cameras. But that note is new." "Yeah," I said, because she knew. Knew what? Knew I'd finally snap. Knew I'd finally defend myself. Knew she could bait me into looking unstable in public and then paint herself as the calm, classy one. That was her whole game. Ethan finished writing and handed the form back with both hands like he was handing me a fragile piece of truth. Mark tucked it into a folder. Mark said, "You want me to go out there now?" My mouth was dry. "Not yet." He stared at me like I had lost my mind. "But you don't win against someone like Brittany by yelling louder than she does. You win by letting her show everybody exactly who she is, then you hold up the mirror when she least expects it." So I said, "I want one more thing." End quote. Mark's eyebrows lifted. I held up the printed itemized check. "I want a photo of this on the table, with them right there. So there's no, we never saw that later. Mark nodded slowly. Okay. How do you want to play it? Quiet, I said. Clean. No drama. I go back out. I let them stand up like they're leaving. I get my photo, then we move. Mark's jaw tightened. And if they start something? I met his eyes. Then we handle it. Mark stepped closer and lowered his voice. Miss Walker, with respect, you don't need to do this alone. If you say the word, I'll walk out there and shut it down. I appreciated that more than I can explain, not because I needed saving, but because it reminded me that normal people still exist. So I said, stay close to the host stand and tell valet not to pull their car yet. Mark's eyes narrowed with understanding. Got it. He grabbed his radio and spoke into it like it was just another Friday night. Hold the black Range Rover at valet. Don't bring it up yet. Black Range Rover. Of course. I took a breath and walked out of the office. The dining room hit me like a stage light, warm, bright, too many eyes everywhere. My table was still going, but the energy had shifted. People were standing, jackets going on, purse straps sliding onto shoulders. They were wrapping up like they'd just had a lovely family dinner. Brittany stood first, like a queen rising. Linda followed. Richard adjusted his watch. Jason reached for the check folder. Brittany said, Okay, we should go. It's getting late. Jason nodded, and his eyes flicked toward my corner seat. He looked almost relieved that I wasn't there. So I gave him what he wanted for 1 second. I stayed out of sight until I could approach from the side. Then I walked up and sat down like I'd never left. Brittany's head snapped toward me. Oh, there you are. End quote. Her tone was the same tone you'd use on someone's lost dog. I smiled politely. Yep. Jason froze with the check folder half open. His eyes did that guilty dart between me and Brittany. Richard looked annoyed. We were about to leave. Great, I said. Me too. Brittany's smile tightened. Did you wash your hands? That nasty little jab like I was dirty. I nodded like I hadn't even heard it. Sure did. End quote. Then I looked right at the check folder and said, Before you pay, could I see that? Jason's fingers clenched around the leather. Brittany laughed softly. Why? Because I'm curious, I said. Jason started to say something, and Brittany cut him off with her eyes. So he didn't. He slid the folder toward me, like he was handing me something dangerous. And it was. I opened it and saw the number again. $780 and change. Itemized line items. Tip line blank. And the header with the party count. Guests. 5. I didn't say a word. I didn't glare. I didn't raise my voice. I just took my phone out, angled it slightly, and snapped one clean photo. Receipt secured. Brittany's face shifted immediately. Did you just take a picture of our bill? I put my phone away. Yep. Jason's voice came out small. Mom, why? I looked at him. Because I like facts. Richard leaned forward, voice low. That's inappropriate. I nodded once. So is making your mother sit here with water. Linda's mouth pinched. Oh my God. Brittany's eyes flashed. Nobody made you. You're being dramatic again. I kept my voice calm. Brittany, your reservation notes literally said water only. Jason went pale. Linda blinked fast like her brain was buffering. What are you talking about? Brittany's chin lifted. That's a lie. End quote. And right there, you know that look people give you when they're lying straight to your face? That look like they're daring you to prove it? She had that look. So I smiled a little and said, okay. That one word made her pause. Because she expected yelling. She expected me to beg for respect. She expected me to storm out like the villain in her little story. Instead, I stood up smoothly, picked up my purse, and said, Let's go. Jason blinked. Go where? I looked at him like he should already know. To the front. Brittany laughed again, sharp. No, we're leaving. Not yet, I said, still calm. Richard started to rise, offended. You don't get to. But I wasn't talking to Richard. My eyes were on Jason. You invited me. You wanted a reconnect. So come on, walk with me. Jason hesitated. I could see the war inside him, fear of Brittany versus fear of me. Brittany grabbed his arm. Jason, no. 2. When a crest, he looked at her, then looked at me, and he stood. That was the first crack. Brittany's face tightened, like she'd just lost control of the remote. So I walked away from the table, and Jason followed. Linda and Richard trailed behind, confused and irritated. Brittany came last, heels clicking like punctuation. The host stand was 10 steps away. Mark Rivera was standing there with his calm manager face on, like he was greeting any customer, but his eyes were locked on me. And I didn't stop at the door. I didn't stop at valet. I stopped right in front of the host stand, where the lighting was bright and the foot traffic was constant. Public enough. Brittany's voice snapped, low and angry. What is this? Mark smiled politely at the group like he didn't already know. Good evening, folks. Everything okay? Brittany jumped in fast. No, this woman is harassing us. This woman, not my mother-in-law, not Patricia, just this woman, like she could verbally erase me. Mark's smile didn't move. Ma'am, I'm sorry to hear that. What seems to be the issue? Brittany pointed at me. She took a photo of our bill. She's making a scene. Mark nodded slowly, like he was taking it seriously. Okay. Then he turned to me. Miss Walker? That name hit the air like a bell. Jason's head snapped toward Mark. Linda's eyes widened. Richard's face shifted. Just slightly, like he'd heard something he didn't expect. Brittany's posture stiffened. Why are you calling her that? Mark kept his tone polite. Because that's her name, ma'am. Brittany scoffed. So, call me ma'am too. Mark nodded. Yes, ma'am. He didn't flinch. He didn't bow. He didn't get rattled. That's the kind of calm that makes bullies nervous. I turned to Brittany and said, You told them to give me water only. Brittany's laugh was louder now, and heads nearby started to turn. Oh my God, she's insane. Anda says. Mark's smile faded, just enough to show seriousness. Miss Collins, we do have reservation notes for tonight. Brittany froze. What? Mark kept going, calm as a spreadsheet. Your reservation included special instructions regarding another guest. Brittany's eyes went wild for half a second. Then she snapped back into control. That's not true. We didn't. Mark lifted a folder slightly. Not open, just visible. We also have audio. Audio. That word did something to the group. Jason's lips parted. Linda blinked hard. Richard's jaw tightened. Brittany stepped forward fast, voice sharp. You can't record customers. Mark didn't raise his voice. We have posted notices, ma'am. It's for safety. Brittany's nostrils flared. This is a violation. I'm calling corporate. Mark nodded like that was her right. You're welcome to. Then he looked at me, and his tone softened just a hair. Miss Walker, would you like to step into the office? I didn't move. No. End quote. Mark's eyebrows lifted. I said, I want them to hear it. Brittany snapped. Hear what? I turned to Jason and said, quiet but clear, the truth. Jason's hands were shaking. He tried to steady them by shoving them into his pockets, but it didn't work. Linda looked between us. Jason, what is going on? Richard's voice was low, angry. This is ridiculous. We're leaving. And that's when Brittany made her move. She grabbed her phone like she'd been waiting for this moment, thumb flying across the screen, and she said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, I'm calling the police. This is harassment. Calling the police. Over a dinner check and her own cruelty. The audacity? Mark's eyes sharpened. Ma'am, please don't escalate. We can resolve. Brittany cut him off. No, I'm done. This woman is stalking us. Stalking? You ever notice how people who do something wrong love to slap a bigger accusation on you so they can play victim? That's what that was. Richard stepped beside her like backup muscle. Yeah, call them. Linda wrapped her arms around herself, looking embarrassed, but still not stepping away. Jason looked like he might throw up, and I stayed calm, because I already had what I needed. I leaned slightly toward Mark and said, "Low, play it." There, Mark hesitated, eyes flicking to the other customers. "Right here?" I nodded once. "Right here. Because Brittany wanted public? Fine." Mark turned, leaned toward the host stand computer where they had a small speaker for calls, and he plugged in his phone. Quick, practiced. Then he looked at me one last time. "You sure?" his eyes asked. I gave him the smallest nod. And Mark hit play. Brittany's voice came out of the speaker, clear as day. "Just water for her. She'll survive." If you... A couple people nearby turned fully. A woman waiting for a table stopped mid-step. Brittany's face went white. Then, Jason's voice followed, softer but unmistakable. "Yeah, that's fine." Silence slammed down. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. "Jason." Richard's face went red so fast it looked painful. "What the hell is that?" Brittany's eyes flashed, and she lunged toward the computer like she could rip the sound out of the air. "Turn that off." Mark stepped back, calm but firm. "Ma'am, do not touch our equipment." Brittany spun on me, shaking. "You set this up." I tilted my head. "No, you did." Richard pointed at Mark. "This is illegal." Mark's tone stayed even. "Sir, our cameras are posted, and this was tied to your reservation notes," Brittany shouted. "Those notes are fake." Mark opened the folder just enough to show a page with Brittany's typed instructions, then closed it again, not waving it around, not dramatizing, just showing her that the paper existed. Proof. Brittany's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted to Jason like, "Fix this." Jason looked down. Linda's voice came out shaky. "Jason, you agreed to that?" Jason whispered. "I didn't think," Richard snapped. "You didn't think?" And right there, in front of the host stand, their perfect little family image started cracking like cheap glass. Brittany hissed at Jason, "Don't talk." Linda turned on Brittany, suddenly loud. "Don't talk to him like that!" 80 says. Brittany's head whipped toward Linda. "Excuse me?" Mark shifted slightly, ready to intervene if it got physical. I stood there and watched it unfold. Because sometimes consequences don't need your help. Sometimes you just stop protecting people from themselves. Then Brittany did the thing I should have predicted. She leaned into the worst lie she could find. She pointed at Mark and said, "He's lying because she's his boss. This is some sick little setup." Mark didn't even blink. "Miss Collins, I am the general manager. I report to Miss Walker." Linda's eyes widened again. "What?" Richard's face twisted. "You're the owner?" I didn't correct him. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to drop the full truth until Brittany dug herself deeper. Brittany laughed, but it sounded like panic. "Oh my God. That's hilarious. You're not anybody." And that line right there was the one that made Mark's face go cold. He said, "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." Quote, end quote. Brittany snapped. "Make me." Richard pulled out his phone, jabbing at it like a weapon. "I'm calling my attorney." Brittany, still tapping her screen, said, "I'm calling 911. Jason finally spoke up, voice cracking. "Brittany, stop." She spun on him, furious. "No, you stop. You're letting her humiliate us." Humiliate us. Like she hadn't just humiliated me for an hour straight. Mark lifted his radio and spoke into it, controlled. "Security to the front, please." I was. And Brittany heard that and smiled, actually smiled like she'd just been handed the storyline she wanted. She said loud, "Good. Get security. I want her removed." Removed? From my own restaurant. So yeah, some people might say I went too far. I say I didn't go far enough. Because I leaned in, close enough that Brittany could smell my perfume, and I said, low and steady, "You really don't understand where you are." Her eyes narrowed. I understand perfectly. I gave her a small smile. No, you don't. Right then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I glanced down and my stomach tightened. It was a photo, grainy, quick, taken from across the room. A photo of me at the host stand, with one line under it. Back off. And the number wasn't Brittany's. It wasn't Jason's. It was someone else in that family's orbit. Someone they'd already looped in. They weren't just embarrassed. They were mobilizing. They hit back. That back off text wasn't just a threat. It was a signal. And you can feel it in your gut when someone's already making calls behind your back. I wasn't scared of Brittany screaming. I was scared of Brittany organizing. Big mistake. I held my phone low by my side, screen angled away from them, and I looked straight at Mark. Don't delete anything, I said. Mark's face was stone. Nothing gets touched. Brittany was pacing 2 feet in front of the host stand like she owned the air. Her cheeks were blotchy, and she kept trying to get her smile back, like if she could just glue it on, reality would cooperate. She pointed at me and said, loud, "This woman is recording us. She's harassing us." You all heard it. A couple at the front turned and stared. A man waiting for a table tightened his grip on his wife's hand like, "Great, dinner and a show." Richard stepped in beside Brittany like he was her bodyguard. "We're leaving, and we're not paying for this nonsense." It was. Mark didn't flinch. "Sir, you already consumed the meal." Richard jabbed a finger toward Mark's chest. "You played a recording of us. That's illegal." Mark stayed calm. "The cameras are posted." Linda was the only one who looked genuinely ashamed. She kept glancing around like she realized other people could hear them, and for someone like her, that's basically an emergency. Jason just stood there. He looked like a kid caught shoplifting. Mouth open, eyes glossy, shoulders slightly hunched. I looked at him and said, quiet enough that he'd hear me, "That recording didn't put words in your mouth." Jason swallowed hard. "Mom, please." I didn't bite. I didn't yell. I just nodded once, like, "Yeah, that's what I thought." Brittany suddenly snapped her head toward me and held up her phone. "Who is texting you?" I didn't answer, because I'm not in the habit of taking orders from a woman who typed water only, like it was a grocery list. She stepped closer, eyes sharp. "Give me your phone." I laughed once, short. "Absolutely not." Her voice jumped an octave. "You can't come in here and record, and..." Mark cut in, firm. "Ma'am, step back." And Brittany did that thing where she pretends she's the one being attacked. She pressed her hand to her chest and said, "Wow, okay. So, this is how you treat paying customers?" Mark didn't blink. "You're welcome to leave." Richard grabbed the check folder off the host stand like he was stealing evidence. "We are leaving." Mark held out his hand. "Sir." Richard yanked the folder back. "Touch me and I'll sue you." And I swear, if Mark hadn't been trained to keep his cool, he would have lost it right there. That's when 2 security guys came up from the side hallway. Black polos, earpieces, the whole deal. Not aggressive, just present. Mark gave them a small nod. Brittany's eyes lit up like Christmas. "Good. Remove her." One of the security guys looked at Mark, then looked at me, confused. You could tell he hadn't been briefed fully. He was reading the room. Mark said, "Nobody's removing Miss Walker." Brittany snapped, "Why do you keep calling her that?" Mark didn't raise his voice. "Because she's Miss Walker." Brittany laughed, shaky. "She's nobody." That line landed wrong with the people nearby. Even strangers have a line, and calling an older woman nobody in public hits that line fast. A woman waiting by the door frowned. A guy at the bar turned his head and watched. Brittany didn't notice. She was too busy trying to regain control. She said, "Jason, let's go. We're not staying here." Jason looked at her, then looked at me. His face was crumpling. He whispered, "Mom, I didn't think it would go like this." "Yeah," I said. "That's the problem. You didn't think." "Ike and Idias did." Richard barked, "Stop talking. We're leaving." And Brittany started walking toward the valet door, like she could just exit the situation and rewrite it later. So I followed, not rushing, not chasing, just walking right behind them like I belonged there, because I did. Outside, the valet area was bright and glossy, the kind of setup where everyone's car looks more expensive under those lights. Brittany's black Range Rover was nowhere in sight because Mark had already told them to hold it. Brittany snapped her fingers at the valet guy. Our car now. The valet kid blinked. 1 second. Brittany leaned in like she was going to intimidate a teenager. No. Now. Richard pulled out his phone again, stabbing at it like he was calling in air support. I'm calling the police. Brittany swung toward me, eyes wide. Good. Call them. She's threatening us. I lifted my eyebrows. By standing here? Jason's voice cracked. Brittany, stop saying that. She whipped around on him. You're not helping. He flinched. Full flinch. Like she'd trained him to. And that right there made my stomach drop in a different way. Because Jason wasn't just choosing her, he was scared of her. Mark stepped out into the valet area. Still calm, still controlled. One of the security guys stayed close behind him. Mark said, Ma'am, sir, please lower your voices. Brittany snapped, No, you humiliated us. You played a recording. You're going to lose your job. And Reservation. Mark's expression didn't change. Okay. That calm made her furious. She jabbed a finger toward me again. She's lying. She's unstable. She's doing this because she wants money. I laughed, because the irony almost took my head off. Richard said, We have connections. We're not going to let this go. And right then, you could feel it turning into a real situation. Not just embarrassment, not just drama. Brittany was going to try to use systems. Police, lawyers, reputation, anything that could scare me into backing off. That back off text wasn't random. It was part of the play. The valet kid came back and said, Nervous, sir, ma'am, we're just waiting on a release. Brittany cut him off. Release? What are you talking about? Mark didn't even look at her. He looked at me and said, quietly, Do you want them to go? Or do you want this finished? I looked at Brittany. She was shaking now, but she was still trying to look powerful. And I realized something ugly. If I let them leave right then, Brittany would spend the whole weekend calling everyone we knew, telling a story where I was some bitter, unstable mother who attacked her family in a restaurant. She'd paint herself as the victim. Jason would nod along, because he always nods along, and I'd be back in the corner. Except this time, it wouldn't be a table. It'd be my own family's narrative. So I said, Finished. I think is a trashin'. Mark gave a small nod and turned to Brittany and Richard. We're going to step back inside. Richard scoffed. No, we're leaving. Mark's voice stayed polite. Sir, until this is resolved, valet will not release the vehicle. Brittany's head snapped toward Mark. You can't hold our car hostage. Mark's tone didn't change. It's private property. Brittany's eyes went wild. This is kidnapping. I stared at her. You've got to be kidding me. Jason looked like he wanted to disappear. The security guy stepped slightly forward, calm but firm. Ma'am, sir, please come inside. Richard puffed up. Touch me and I'll. Save it, I said, quiet. Richard's eyes flicked to me like he couldn't believe I'd spoken. And that was the moment the power dynamic shifted again. Because he wasn't used to me having a voice. Brittany tried one last move at the valet. She lifted her phone and said, loud, I'm live. I looked around. She wasn't live. She was pretending. She wanted that threat hanging in the air. That idea that she could broadcast a version of me that made me look crazy. I smiled slightly. Go ahead. Make sure you get your good side. Brittany's mouth tightened. She hated that I wasn't scared. So we went back inside. Mark led us straight through the dining room. Not to the office. Not to a private corner. Right down the center aisle. Past candlelit tables. Past people trying to pretend they weren't watching. And people were watching. That's the part Brittany didn't think through. She thought public humiliation only worked one direction. She thought the audience would always be on her side because she looked expensive. She forgot Dallas has plenty of expensive people who still recognize cruelty when they see it. Mark stopped at our original table, table 12. The place setting that had been empty for me was still there, like a ghost. He gestured. "Please," Brittany hissed. "This is insane." End quote. Richard muttered. "We're being held hostage." Linda sat down stiffly like she was trying to preserve dignity. Jason dropped into his chair like his bones were made of sand. Brittany stayed standing for a second, scanning the room, noticing the eyes, noticing the whispers. Then she sat, jaw clenched. Mark didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the table like he was about to make an announcement. Brittany leaned back and crossed her arms. "I want corporate. Right now." Mark nodded. "Okay." And then he turned and looked at the waiter station, and he said something into his radio that I couldn't fully hear. A minute later, the kitchen door swung open, and the man who stepped out wasn't Ethan. It was the head chef. Mid-50s, broad shoulders, chef coat crisp. The kind of man who runs a kitchen like a ship. We hadn't introduced him before, because he wasn't part of the humiliation. He was part of the backbone. His name was Julian Price. Julian's eyes found me immediately. His face softened just a hair. Then he walked straight to the table and stopped at my chair. And in a voice loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, he said, "Mrs. Walker." Brittany's head jerked up. "Excuse me?" Julian ignored her completely and looked at me. "I heard you didn't get served." Jason's face went white. Linda's mouth opened like she was trying to form a sentence and couldn't. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Julian's voice stayed steady. "I'm the executive chef." "One." Brittany laughed, brittle. "Okay, then mind your business." Julian turned his gaze to her, calm and unimpressed. "It is my business." Brittany leaned forward. "Are you seriously taking her side?" Julian didn't raise his voice. "I'm taking the side of basic decency." A couple people nearby murmured. Someone at a table 2 rows over actually chuckled. Brittany's cheeks flushed. She looked around, realizing she was losing the crowd. So she doubled down, because that's what she does. She said, "This woman is lying. She caused a scene. She's unstable, and she's trying to ruin our night because she's jealous." Julian glanced at Mark. Mark opened the folder he'd been carrying and pulled out one sheet. He didn't hand it to me. He handed it to Brittany. Mark said, calm, "These are your reservation notes." Brittany stared at the paper like it was radioactive. Richard leaned in. Linda leaned in. Jason leaned in. And Brittany's eyes landed on the line. Water only. 89. Brittany's face went blank for half a second. Then she snapped her eyes up and barked, "Fake." Mark didn't blink. "It was entered through our system, under your name." Brittany shoved the paper away like it burned. "No, someone put that in." Julian's voice was flat. "You did." Brittany's eyes flashed. "Prove it." Mark tapped another sheet. "We can." He looked at Julian, and Julian gave a slight nod. Mark said, "We have audio and video." Brittany went stiff. "You already played one clip." "That doesn't mean," Mark cut in, still calm, "it means we can play more." Jason's head dropped. Linda's hands started shaking. Richard looked furious, but it wasn't righteous fury. It was panic fury. The kind men get when their authority isn't working. Brittany's eyes swung to Jason. "Say something." Jason whispered, "Brittany." She hissed, "No, you say something." And he didn't. He just stared at the tablecloth like it might swallow him whole. Julian looked at me, voice softening. "Mrs. Walker, do you want this handled privately?" I looked around the dining room. Eyes everywhere. People pretending to eat, failing. A woman at a nearby table had her phone face down on the table like she'd been recording earlier and got nervous. I thought about that back off text. I thought about Brittany spinning this story later. And I thought, no, not private. So I said, public is fine. Brittany let out this little laugh like she couldn't believe me. Oh, wow. You're loving this. I looked her right in the face. You started it. Richard slammed his palm on the table. Enough. This is ridiculous. Julian didn't flinch. Sir, lower your voice. Richard blinked like he'd never been corrected in his life. Brittany snapped. Don't talk to my father that way. Julian's eyes didn't move. Then don't treat people that way. Brittany's voice dropped, sharp and ugly. She's not people. She's a burden. And that word burden hit the room like somebody threw a glass. A couple at the nearest table actually turned fully. A man at the bar muttered, Damn. Jason's face crumpled. Brittany, stop. She whipped toward him. Don't you tell me to stop. Linda finally spoke, voice trembling. Marlene. Brittany snapped her head toward Linda. Don't. Linda shrank back. And right there, I saw the whole structure. Brittany steamrolled everyone. Her parents, my son, staff, me. Whoever didn't push back got flattened. Not today. I leaned forward, calm, and said, Do you want to know what's funny? You spent the whole night acting like this place was yours. Brittany's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I looked at Julian, then at Mark. Tell her. Mark took a breath, and for the first time all night, his voice carried. Miss Collins, Miss Walker is the owner of Harbor and Vine. Silence. Not polite silence, shock silence. Brittany blinked hard like her eyes were lying to her. Richard's mouth fell open. Linda's hand flew to her chest. Jason's whole body sagged like the air got sucked out of him. Brittany laughed once, loud and fake. No, she's not. Mark didn't move. Yes, she is. Brittany turned to Julian, desperate. That's not true. Julian's voice was even. It's true. Brittany looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Then her face did something I'll never forget. The contempt cracked, and underneath it was pure calculation, like a switch flipped from crush her to how do I survive this? Richard stammered. That can't be right. I kept my voice steady. It's right. Jason's eyes filled. He whispered, Mom, what? I looked at him, and my voice got quiet. You never asked. That landed harder than any scream could have. Brittany's tone shifted instantly, syrupy. Okay, wait. Wow. This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. She typed water only. She told staff to record me if I made a scene. She called me a burden. Now it's a misunderstanding. Give me a break. Richard tried to recover, because ego doesn't go down without a fight. If you're the owner, why would you let your own mother be treated that way? I looked at him. Because I wanted to see what kind of people you were. Brittany snapped. That's sick. I shrugged slightly. Was it sick when you ordered me water? Julian stepped slightly forward. Miss Collins, do you want to apologize? Brittany's jaw clenched. She glanced around the room. She realized people were listening. She realized she couldn't bully her way out of this with volume. So she tried the next trick. Tears. Her eyes glassed over instantly. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. And I'll give her this. She was good at it. Real-time performance. Jason looked torn. Because he's always been a sucker for her tears. That's how she keeps him on a leash. He whispered, Brittany. She reached for his hand, soft. Baby, I didn't know. I thought she hated me. I cut in, quiet. Don't. Brittany's eyes snapped to me. I said, don't use his love as a shield. Jason's hand pulled back from Brittany's. Small and slow. That was the second crack. Linda wiped at her eyes, embarrassed and upset. Why would you do that to her? She asked Brittany, voice shaking. Brittany's head turned furious. Mom, stop. Linda flinched again, but she didn't stop. You said people thought she was the help. You said that. Brittany's eyes flashed. I was joking. Mark's voice was flat. We have that recorded too. Brittany went rigid. Richard stood up like he was going to force control back into his hands. We're leaving. Julian nodded to security, and one of the security guys stepped slightly closer. Not touching, just there. Julian said, You can leave, but you will not threaten staff, and you will not touch equipment. Understood? Richard's face was purple. He looked around the room, realized the crowd wasn't with him, and sat back down hard. Jason whispered, Broken. Mom, I'm sorry. Brittany snapped. Jason. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. His eyes were wet and ashamed, and I wanted to feel victorious right then. I wanted that sweet moment where the world flips and you feel powerful. But the truth? It hurt, because this wasn't some stranger. It was my son. Julian said, Mrs. Walker, what would you like to do? I stared at the empty place setting that had been my spot all night, and I felt my hands go cold again. So I made a decision. I said, I want the truth on the table. All of it. Brittany's eyes narrowed. What truth? I looked at Mark. Show me the notes history. Mark opened the folder and pulled out the printed reservation history he'd grabbed earlier. He set it down in front of Brittany and Jason like a stack of unpaid bills. Brittany's eyes scanned the pages, and her face drained, because there it was. Not one dinner, multiple. Older woman, arriving separately. Minimal service. Seat at end. A pattern. Jason stared at the pages like he was reading his own character for the first time, and he didn't like it. Linda whispered, horrified, You've done this before? Brittany snapped, No. Mark tapped the dates. Yes. Everyone. Richard leaned forward, voice low. Why do you have that information? Mark's answer was simple. Because it's our system. Julian looked at Brittany. So it wasn't a misunderstanding. Brittany's lips trembled, and for a split second, she looked trapped. Then she got angry. She leaned forward and hissed at me. If you're so rich, why were you living like you're not? Why did you make him believe you were struggling? There it was. That's the pivot. Turning my privacy into a crime. I kept my voice quiet because I didn't want my son loving me for my money. Jason flinched like he'd been slapped. Brittany shot back. Well, congratulations. You got your little test? Now you're going to lose him. And that line was the first thing that actually made me wobble. Because she said it like a promise. Like she already had something in motion. My phone buzzed again. Another text from that unknown number. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a screenshot of an email draft. Subject line, Elder Abuse Concern, Patricia Walker. My stomach turned, because whoever was texting me wasn't just watching. They were preparing a report. Something official looking. Something that could cause a nightmare if it got traction. Brittany saw my face change and smiled. That smile told me everything. She said, Lo, you can't win this. My hands tightened around my phone. Then, Mark leaned slightly toward me and said, under his breath, Mrs. Walker, there's one more camera. End quote. I looked at him. He nodded toward the ceiling near the host stand. The one that catches phone screens when people text at the counter. It's high resolution. My pulse kicked. Because if Brittany's people were sending threats and drafting reports, there was a good chance someone at that table had been coordinating in real time, texting, calling, lining up the next hit. And if that camera caught it, that wasn't just proof. That was the weapon. Mark leaned in and said, That camera can read a phone screen. And you know that feeling when the whole room goes sharp? Yeah, that, done. Brittany was still sitting there at my table like she could bully reality back into place. Her eyes kept flicking to my phone like she was trying to figure out what I'd just received, who I'd just heard from, what I'd just learned. Richard kept puffing up and deflating, like an angry balloon with a leak. Linda sat stiff and pale, clutching her purse like it could save her. Jason looked wrecked, staring at the reservation printouts like they were a death certificate. And I stood there thinking, okay, if they're going to swing at me with elder abuse reports and threats, then I'm done playing nice. So I looked at Mark and said, "Quiet. Pull that footage." Mark nodded once and turned to head back toward the host stand. Brittany snapped, "Where are you going?" Mark didn't even glance at her. "To do my job." She turned to me, voice syrupy again. "Patricia, come on. Let's not do this in front of everyone." I pointed at the empty place setting that had been mine all night. "You started doing things in front of everyone a long time ago." Julian Price, my chef, stepped in closer, calm but solid. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice." Brittany looked at him like he'd betrayed her personally. "You work for me." Julian didn't blink. "No, I don't." Actually, that little exchange got a couple quiet laughs from nearby tables, and Brittany heard it. You could see it. Her face tightened. She hated being laughed at. Richard shoved his chair back like he wanted to stand and tower over somebody. "This is harassment." Julian's voice stayed steady. "Sir, sit down." Richard hesitated, actually hesitated, then sat, furious. Because even bullies can feel when the room's against them. Mark came back fast with a tablet in his hand. He said, "I've got a clear angle." Brittany's eyes widened. "You can't show private messages?" Mark kept it simple. "It's our camera feed." Brittany turned to me, panicking now. "This is sick. You set a trap." I looked at her. "No. I documented what you did." Jason finally spoke, voice raw. "Brittany, who sent that back-off text?" Brittany snapped her head toward him. "Nobody. It's fake." Jason's face crumpled. "Stop lying." That's why. That was the first time I'd heard him say it like that to her. Not please. Not calm down. Just stop lying. Brittany's eyes flashed. "Don't you talk to me like that." Jason flinched, but he didn't fold all the way. He looked at me, eyes wet. "Mom, I'm sorry. And look, if you've ever waited years for your kid to say, 'I'm sorry,' you already know what a messy moment that is. Part of you wants to grab them. Part of you wants to scream. Part of you wants to rewind your whole life. But another part of you thinks, where was that energy when I was sitting there with water?" So I said, "I hear you." That was all I gave him. Brittany jumped in immediately, trying to grab the moment. "Jason, you don't need to apologize for her being dramatic." Julian's mouth tightened. Mark glanced at me like, "You want me to handle her?" I did. I turned to Brittany and said, "You don't get to speak for him anymore." Brittany's laugh came out sharp. "Oh my God." As Ree said. And then Mark held up the tablet. He didn't play it with sound at first. He just angled it so the four of them could see what the camera caught at the host stand side of the dining room. It was Brittany, earlier, leaning slightly away from the table, phone in hand, her thumbs moving fast. And because that camera was upgraded for exactly this kind of thing, the screen was readable. A text thread. The contact name at the top said, Kelsey. Longing and divested. And the message Brittany had sent was right there, plain as day. Brittany texted, "Draft the elder abuse email. Use her full name. Make it sound official. If she pulls anything, send it." Right underneath that, another message from Brittany. Also, text her from my old number, back off. My stomach turned, but not because I was surprised. Because I was right. Brittany's face went ghost white. Linda's hand flew to her mouth again. Richard's eyes went wild. Jason stared like his brain couldn't process what his wife had just done. Mark didn't need to narrate it. The proof narrated itself. And then Mark tapped once and brought up the next part of the footage. Brittany holding her phone close to her chest, glancing around, then smirking as she hit send. The smirk was the part that made my skin crawl. Jason's voice broke. "Brittany, what is wrong with you?" Brittany shot up from her chair so fast it almost tipped backward. "This is illegal. This is insane. You can't do this." Richard stood too, chest puffed. "We're leaving." Julian stepped in slightly, not touching, just present. "You can leave when you're calm." Brittany jabbed a finger at Mark. "You're going to get sued into the ground." Mark's face didn't move. "Okay, That calm was killing her. Linda looked at Brittany like she didn't recognize her. You were going to report her? For what? Brittany snapped. To protect my family. End quote. Linda's voice got stronger, shakier, but louder. From a grandma? You denied her food. Brittany's eyes flashed. She's toxic. Toxic, I repeated, almost laughing. You know what's toxic? Typing water only, like you're ordering sides. Richard barked, Enough. We're not doing this. I turned to Richard. You sure loved the standards talk earlier. Richard's face went red. Don't. I kept my voice steady. Standards are how you treat the person you think can't hurt you. End quote. Jason's shoulders started shaking. He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to hold it in. Then he dropped his hands and looked at me like a kid again. He said, Mom, I was a coward. That one landed, because it was true. It was the truth I'd been waiting for, and hearing it hurt more than the lie. Brittany's voice cut in, furious. Jason, stop it. She's manipulating you. Jason snapped, louder than I'd ever heard him. No, you did this. Brittany froze. Jason stood up fully now, chair scraping loud across the floor, heads turned. People were watching again, but this time it wasn't me being humiliated. It was their mask slipping in public. Jason looked at Brittany and said, You told them to starve my mom. Brittany's face twisted. She wasn't starving. She had water. Jason's voice cracked. Are you hearing yourself? Brittany lunged for his arm. Come on, we're leaving. Jason pulled back. That was the moment Linda made a sound, half sob, half gasp. She sank back into her chair and said, Richard, we raised her better than this. Richard's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. He just stared at Brittany like he was trying to decide whether to defend her or distance himself. And Brittany saw that too. Her eyes darted around, calculating, and then she tried her next pivot. Fast. She turned to me, tears suddenly ready, voice trembling. Patricia, I didn't know you owned this place. I swear. If I knew, I never. I cut her off. Don't. She blinked, tears hanging. What? I kept my tone flat. Don't tell me you wouldn't be cruel if I had less. That landed like a brick. Because that's the whole point, right? If the only reason you'd treat me with decency is because I have money, then you're not decent. You're strategic. Brittany's tears vanished. Anger replaced them instantly. So what? You hid your wealth like some kind of test. I nodded once. Yes. End quote. Jason flinched. Mom. I looked at him. I didn't hide it to punish you. I hid it because I wanted a real relationship, not a transaction. Richard scoffed. Oh, please. I turned to him. You've been treating people like transactions all night. Julian spoke up. Calm. Mrs. Walker, do you want them escorted out? There it was. The moment where I could go for the throat. And I did. Just not the way Brittany expected. I said, not yet. Brittany laughed, bitter. Why? You want to lecture us? I shook my head. I want terms. Jason swallowed hard. Terms? Yeah, I said. Because you don't get access to my life for free. Brittany's eyes narrowed. Access? Wow. So you are buying him. Jason snapped. Brittany, stop. I looked at Jason and spoke directly. Steady. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave tonight without another scene. You're going to pay that check. You're going to apologize to the staff you disrespected. And you're going to stop using Emma like a bargaining chip. Linda whispered. Emma. Jason's face crumpled again. Brittany scoffed. You can't dictate. Julian's voice was calm but firm. Ma'am, you don't get to dictate here. Brittany glared at him. Shut up. Julian didn't move. No. The room was so quiet, you could hear silverware clink 2 tables over. Richard leaned forward, voice low. And if we don't? I met his eyes. Then you get trespassed. Brittany laughed. Oh, please. Mark stepped in, still calm. We can do that right now. Brittany's laugh died because suddenly it wasn't imaginary. It was a manager and security and a room full of witnesses and a camera feed that didn't care about her feelings. Jason looked at me and said, barely above a whisper, "Mom, what about Emma?" That's the knife. And I want you to hear me on this. Because some people will say what I did next was cruel. I don't care. I said, Emma deserves a family that doesn't treat love like a weapon. Jason's tears spilled. He wiped them fast, ashamed. I know. Brittany's face twisted. So you're taking her away? I shook my head. No, you are. Linda spoke up, shaky. Marlene, Brittany, why would you do this? Why would you treat her like she's nothing? Brittany snapped, because she acts like she's nothing. Jason turned on her, voice shaking. That's my mom. Brittany's eyes went hard. And I'm your wife. End quote. And you're wrong, Jason said. Silence again. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. Linda looked like she wanted to crawl out of her skin. Brittany looked furious that she was losing control. Jason looked like he'd finally realized he'd been living someone else's script. Julian leaned toward me, voice low. Mrs. Walker, we can wrap this up. I nodded. Yeah. Then I turned to Brittany and said, apologize. Brittany's mouth opened. She stared at me like I'd asked her to eat glass. Richard barked. This is ridiculous. I didn't look at him. Apologize to the staff, not to me. Mark stepped forward slightly. Ethan is right there. Ethan stood near the server station, face pale, hands clasped in front of him like he was trying not to shake. Brittany looked at Ethan like he was the enemy. For what? For treating him like a tool, I said. For snapping your fingers at him. For asking him to participate in humiliating someone. Brittany's eyes flashed. He could have said no. Julian's voice went cold. He works. Here. Brittany finally looked around and realized she didn't have the room anymore. Not the staff, not the diners, not even her own parents. So she did it, but she did it like poison. She turned toward Ethan and said, stiff. Sorry. Ethan didn't smile. He just nodded once. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. Then I looked at Jason. And you? End quote. Jason swallowed hard. Mom, I'm sorry. I agreed. I let it happen. I wanted them to like me. That truth was ugly, but it was real. I nodded once. I know. Brittany snapped. So what? You're going to cut him off? I said, I'm going to protect myself. And then I said the thing that mattered most. I looked at Jason and said, if you want a relationship with me, it starts with actions. Not tears, not texts. Actions. Jason nodded, like he was holding on to that word with both hands. Okay. Brittany laughed, bitter. You think she's going to let you back in? She's loving this. Jason looked at her and said, quiet. I'm not doing this anymore. Brittany froze like she hadn't heard him right. What? Jason's voice got steadier. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not letting you talk to my mom like she's trash. Brittany's face went tight. You're choosing her over me? Jason hesitated just a flicker, then said, I'm choosing right over wrong. And 2010. That line made Linda sob quietly. Richard stared at the table like he wanted to crawl under it. Brittany looked like she wanted to slap him. Julian spoke into his radio, calm. Security, escort our guests out, please. 2 security guys stepped in. Polite, professional. One gestured toward the front. Brittany shot a look around the dining room, seeing faces turn toward her, and her pride couldn't handle it. She grabbed her purse so hard the strap squeaked. She hissed at me as she stood. You just blew up your own family. I smiled slightly. No, you did. Richard muttered. This is unbelievable. Linda didn't say a word. She just kept wiping her face. Humiliated. Jason stayed standing for a second, looking at me like he wanted to hug me and also knew he didn't deserve to. I said, quiet. Go home. Get your head straight. He nodded, broken. Okay. I know. And then they were walked out past tables, past stairs, past the host stand where Brittany's whole little plan had gotten caught on camera. That was the financial consequence too, by the way. Mark ran the card. The bill got paid. No, we're not paying. No magical escape. And because people like Brittany love to pull chargebacks later, Mark printed a packet. The reservation notes, the footage timestamps, the guest count, the signed incident report from Ethan. A neat little folder for the bank to laugh at if Brittany tried it. Receipts don't argue. When the doors shut behind them, the whole dining room exhaled. People went back to eating, but you could tell the story had already taken root. A woman at a nearby table caught my eye and gave me a tiny nod like, "Good for you." Julian touched my shoulder lightly. "You okay?" I shrugged, because what do you even say? My son had agreed to starve me at my own restaurant. Okay wasn't the word. So I said, "I'm still standing." Julian nodded, like he respected that answer. Mark said, "We'll ban them if you want." "I do," I said. "Gone." Mark didn't ask follow-up questions. He just nodded and started typing names, phone numbers, a note. Do not seat, do not serve, notify management. Then Julian walked me back through the service hallway again, past the heat and the noise and the staff who kept glancing up like they'd just watched Karma in real time. Back in the office, Mark printed one more thing and slid it to me. It was a screenshot still from the camera Brittany's phone screen with the elder abuse email instruction visible. Mark said, "This is the deterrent. If she tries anything, we have it." I stared at it for a second, then tucked it into my purse like a passport, because that's what it was. Protection. I left through the side exit because I didn't want the front door attention. The Texas night air hit my face, warm and slightly humid, and my hands started shaking as soon as I got into my car. That's the part nobody sees. You can look calm in public and still fall apart in private. So I sat there in the parking lot for a minute, breathing through it, staring at the steering wheel like it had answers. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Jason. He wrote, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I hate myself for what I did. I'll do whatever you say. Please don't shut me out." 2. Any first away. I stared at it, thumb hovering, and I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, because I wasn't going to soothe him out of his own consequences. 10 minutes later, another buzz. A different number. A text that said, "This is Martin. I was the guy at the bar. I saw everything. Standing up for yourself isn't cruelty. It's survival." That one made my throat tighten. Because sometimes a stranger gives you the kindness your own family won't. I texted him back one word. "Thank you. A." Then I drove home. And here's the salt in the wound moment Brittany never saw coming, because while she was trying to draft some fake concern email, Mark was already doing something else. He was calling my attorney, not to be dramatic, to be smart. By the time I got home to my little apartment in Dallas, the one Brittany would have sneered at if she ever stepped inside, I had an email waiting from my lawyer with a simple subject line, "Cease and desist draft, Collins." Short, clean, ready to send if Brittany tried to push that elder abuse nonsense anywhere official. And if you think that's too far, ask yourself this. Would Brittany have stopped on her own? No. I tossed my purse on the kitchen table and finally let myself feel it. The anger, the grief, the exhaustion, all of it. On my fridge, I had a photo of Emma in a little pink shirt, frosting on her nose, smiling like the world was safe. I stared at that photo and whispered, "I'm not doing this for pride. I'm doing this so she grows up around love." Then I sat down and made my final decision, right there at my kitchen table. Jason could have a path back, but it wasn't going to be paved with apologies. It was going to be paved with proof. I opened my notes app and typed 3 rules. 1. Any visit with Emma happens with respect, or it doesn't happen. 2. Brittany never speaks to me again without an apology and changed behavior. 3. If anyone files anything false about me, I respond with evidence and lawyers. Simple. Fair. Unmovable. Love without respect isn't love. The next morning, Jason texted again. I left last night. I'm staying with a friend. I told Brittany she can't control me anymore. I read it twice. Then I still didn't reply. Because words are easy the morning after you get caught. Later that day, Linda called me. Actual phone call. Her voice was shaky and tired. She said, Patricia, I'm sorry. I didn't understand who she'd become. I didn't snap at her. I didn't comfort her either. I said, you saw it now. She whispered, yes. And I said, then do something about it. After I hung up, I drove to Target like a normal person, because life doesn't stop just because your family imploded in public. I walked past the home goods aisle and almost laughed, because there were people arguing over throw pillows while my whole world was on fire. But here's what surprised me. I felt lighter, not happy, not warm, just lighter, because that dinner finally cured me of something that had been poisoning me for years. The need to be chosen. My place is wherever I decide. So when Jason eventually comes back with actions, not speeches, we'll see what kind of man he wants to be. And Brittany? She can keep her standards. I have mine. If you want more stories like this, real receipts, real consequences, hit subscribe before you go. Because I'm not done telling the truth.